We are in council chambers. It is Wednesday, April the 20th, 2016. We're here for a special council public planning meeting. Madam Clerk, it's 7 o'clock. Councillors, declarations of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof, please. Seeing none, may I please have a motion to approve the agenda has been circulated? Councillor Abel, Councillor Thompson, comments or questions? All in favor? Contrary? It's carried. Thank you. We have 3 planning applications this evening. I have a public statement that I read. Welcome to Aurora's public planning meeting. The purpose of this public meeting is to inform the public and obtain public information regarding the proposed official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendments, and draft plan of subdivision. No decision will be made on the applications in items 1 and 2. However, Council may adopt a decision tonight on application number 3. For each planning application that will be considered by Council tonight, the following process will occur. Town planning staff will outline the purpose of the planning application which is being considered. The applicant will then be given an opportunity to make a presentation and address issues which have been raised in either the staff report or public concerns that have already been filed. Following these presentations, members of the public will be invited to offer their comments or concerns with respect to the proposal. Once we've gotten a number of those issues, I will ask either staff or the proponent to address them. Once we've heard from all the members of the public, I will ask members of council if they have any comments or questions on the presentation. It should be noted that a comprehensive report will be prepared and presented to a future general committee meeting assessing the merits of the application before us and providing council with a recommendation for consideration. It's very important that the town receive the correct name and addresses of individuals having an interest in the planning applications. Therefore, if you plan to speak to council at this meeting or if you wish to be notified of further council or committee meetings concerning the applications being considered, you must complete one of the green interested party forms that Linda is holding up. And please return it to Linda before you leave this evening. Under the Planning Act, the applicant or residents have a right to appeal any decision of council on a planning application to the Ontario Municipal Board, but you must verbally express any comments or concerns here tonight or submit any comments or concerns in writing to the town prior to council adopting an amendment. The Ontario Municipal Board may dismiss all or part of an appeal made in respect of an application. The public meeting is being audio and video recorded. Your name, address, comments, and any other personal information are being recorded according to the Municipal Act and the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. This will help our town clerk prepare accurate minutes and to create a record that is available to the general public, including the town's website. Questions about this collection should be directed to the town clerk, Town of Aurora. I will now ask the Deputy Clerk to confirm that notification to the public has occurred as required by the Planning Act. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With respect to item 1, application for zoning bylaw amendment, Millwell Properties, Inc., 55 Wellington Street West, file number ZBA 2016-02, on March 31st, 2016, notice of public planning meeting was published in the Aurora and Aurora Banner newspapers and given by mail to all addressed property owners within a minimum of 120 meters of the subject lands. Notice of the public planning meeting signs were also posted on the subject lands fronting Wellington Street West and Mill Street. With respect to item 2, applications for official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and draft plan of subdivision, Ashland Holdings, Inc., 13859, 13875, and 13887 Yonge Street, file numbers OPA-2015-03, SUB-2015-04, ZBA-2015-08. A notice of the second public planning meeting was given by mail to all interested parties on March 31st, 2016. And with respect to item 3, application for zoning bylaw amendment, Small Steps Program, Inc., 138 Center Street, file number ZBA-2015-11 and SP-2015-09. A notice of public planning meeting was also given by mail to all interested parties. Public meeting notification for all 3 items has been provided in accordance with the Planning Act.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will now ask the Director of Planning and Development Services to begin with the presentations. Mr. Ramuno, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 1, the Millwell Properties zoning bylaw amendment application. It's the first time this has been before Special Council Public Planning. Marty Rokos is the planner on the file. He's actually the planner handling all 3 items this evening. Item 2 and 3 have been before Special Council Public Planning. Marty will provide a overview of the item number 1, and the applicant's planner is here to also present on the matter, Helen Lepick. Marty?
Mr. Mayor and members of council, thank you. This application is for 55 Wellington Street West by Millwell Properties, Inc. It's a zoning bylaw amendment application. The property is at the corner of Wellington Street West and Mill Street. And as you can see on the air photo, there are two buildings on the property. The one that's the subject of this application is 55 Wellington, which is the one on the north, fronting onto Wellington. The other building is 20 Mill Street, and there are no changes proposed to that building, and that's the one on the south. In the official plan, the property is designated stable neighborhoods and public parkland. The public parkland designation is on a small portion of the property at the northeast corner of the property at the intersection. The stable neighborhoods designation is intended to protect the area from incompatible forms of development and at the same time be permitted to evolve and be enhanced over time. The permitted uses include multiple unit buildings, existing multiple unit buildings, I should clarify, local convenience and service retail, offices, and childcare facilities, among other uses. As you can see on the official plan map, the majority of the property is within the stable neighborhoods designation, and it's just that corner that's the dark green shade that's within the public parkland designation. The property is zoned central commercial C2-1A exception zone, as well as third density apartment residential exception, and that's an RA3-1 exception zone. The zoning is basically split up into three portions. The larger building, the 5-story building at 55 Wellington, has this portion of it zoned central commercial, and that's the portion that used to have the daycare in it, which is now closed. And the rest of the building has the third density apartment residential zone to it. The building at 20 Mill Street, the 2-story building, is the same third density apartment residential zone, but it has a provision in the zoning that allows 38 apartment units special, which is 1-bedroom and bachelor units that are administered by York Region. And you can see on the zoning map which part of the property has the RA3 zone to it, as well as the commercial zone, which is just in the northeast corner of the building. Here's what's on site right now. The building, the part where the daycare used to be, is that part that sticks out towards the corner in the northeast corner. And the rest of the building has the residential zone. 20 Mill Street with the 1-bedroom and bachelor units is on the south side. The main vehicle entrance for both buildings is off of Mill Street. The building at 55 Wellington has underground parking, and the 2-story building has its own driveway and parking area on the south side of the site. So here's what they're proposing. As I said, the daycare has closed, and the space is now vacant. The owner is proposing to convert that space to residential apartments and remove the commercial zone. They're also actually splitting some of the other units in the building. Some of the 2-story units are being converted to 1-story units, and the net effect of that would be 10 additional apartment dwelling units on the property. I should clarify that the signs on the property say that there are 12 additional units, and that refers to the residential zone specifically. If you include the 2 units that are already there permitted in the C2 zone, it ends up being an increase of 10 units over the entire property versus what's permitted now. There are 109 parking spaces on the property right now. There are no changes proposed to that, and no changes to the site plan or existing buildings are being proposed. A little more information on the rent supplement agreement that York Region administers those units at 20 Mill Street. That was developed as a building originally through Canada Mortgage and Housing, and now it's York Region that administers it. And those do have a lower parking requirement, and they are smaller units. And that agreement with York Region has been extended into 28 units at 55 Wellington Street West. so that a total of 66 units on the subject lands are, have that agreement and are administered by the region. So just in a little bit more detail, we have what they're proposing here. The building, the 5-story building, right now it permits 68 dwelling units in the residential zone portion, as well as 2 dwelling units in the commercial zone portion, for a total of 70. And in the 2-story building at 20 Mill Street, a maximum of 38 units. They're known as apartment special, and those are the ones with 1 bedroom only and bachelor only. So for a total of 108 properties, or sorry, 108 dwellings, units permitted on the entire site. The application is to increase that by 10 to a total of 118. For the parking, the apartment units have a requirement of 1.25 spaces per apartment dwelling, and the apartment special units with the 1 bedroom and bachelor have a requirement of 0.4 spaces per apartment dwelling special. And the applicant has shown in their parking study that even with the additional units, with those rates of 1.25 and 0.4, with the unit mix, there are no additional spaces that are required. We've done an initial review, not a detailed review, but an initial one, that, and some of the preliminary comments on things we're looking at include the compatibility of the proposal relative to surrounding land uses, the suitability of additional dwelling units at this site, and parking supply for additional dwelling units. As noted in the report, we will do a comprehensive review, taking into account the comments received at the meeting tonight, and have a report with recommendations come to a future general committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Ms. Lepick.
I'm here on behalf of Millwell. I have the owner here with me, Mr. Peter Sigmund, and I hoped to have the project architect, but I think he may be caught in traffic. So we will do our best to answer any questions you have. I'm not going to go into the details again, since Mr. Rokos spoke about them in great detail. I just want to say that this will provide an opportunity for additional rental units in a location that is transit accessible. The buildings are well maintained. There are no parking issues in this area. We've done an extensive pre-consultation, and the preliminary comments that have come back, there's no issues that have been identified. There's no outside site works required. Part of the only issue that we came up with, which hasn't even been addressed nor probably needs to, is the Conservation Authority was concerned about the lowness of Mill Street, and we did topographic surveys to indicate that ingress and egress to the building will be safe. It's a make rental happen kind of thing. The region really needs additional rental units. These are suitable for seniors, empty nesters. It's an important type of project. I would indicate that the daycare center closed, and there was no uptake for that commercial site. It was empty for over a year. So the owner had to look at options, and this is a really good option that I think is good for the owner and also good for the municipality, and we will try to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Lepick. I will now open it up to any members of the public who have any comments or questions on this particular application. If there's no members of the public who have an interest in this particular application, I will open it up to members of council. Any questions for the proponent on this particular application? Councillor Perry, Councillor Gardner.
I just want to confirm that it's going to be affordable housing And if we could get an idea what level of subsidization is going to be offered through the region of York, if possible.
Ms. Lepick? Could you please come to the microphone?
This is Mr. Peter Sigmund, Mr. Chair. He's the owner of Millwell Properties. He's the owner of Millwell Properties. And he's more familiar with the agreement with York Region. It's 66 units. I know that, and I saw the subsidy list, and they vet the applicants, and the subsidies vary according to the income level and what the situation is. I don't think, and you can correct me, it's not a guarantee that there'll be 10 more subsidized units.
No, because it depends on how we configure the daycare center, because it was that we can put 3 units there, or 4, or 2 only. So that my architect is sort of working on that. But we have there are 5 stacked units, and those might be ideal for subsidy. That we basically cut them in half, because they have access from the upper floor and the lower floor, and then they become 2 one-bedroom units instead of 1 3-bedroom units. And that sort of is an option for, and I'm going to offer that to housing. So there will be 5 more, actually 10 more housing units in that way available. And since the 3 bedrooms now get converted into,
That works for me, thank you.
is that the answer to your question?
The question was around the level of subsidy, but it was described that it depends on the situation of each individual, and I think that's great, so
Yeah,
thank
it's
you.
the individual incomes, and it's they basically, the tenants apply for subsidized, and depending on their income levels, they get subsidies for that. So it's sort of beyond my control, really.
Any other questions for the proponent from council? Councillor Gardner, Councillor Abel.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm a little bit confused. In my report, it says that there's 68 apartment dwelling units at 55 Wellington and 38 of the special dwelling units on Mill Street.
There was
38, yes.
There was 38, and then there's 38. The entire building at 20 Mill Street is available for York Regional Housing, okay? And in 55 Wellington, there's 28 additional units. The approval back in the 1980s was for the original 38. And then over the years, another 28 were added,
Okay.
okay?
So
They
it,
asked
so
us
this
to
may
get-
or may not be.
Yeah, well, they asked us to get more units, and over the years, I've owned the building since 1989, so it's almost 30 years. So every year, they've asked for more units for subsidized housing. So I've been sort of giving in to them, and so now they have 66 instead of 38 originally.
Thank you. It's, as you said, it's a good area for that because it's on a transit line.
Yes.
So you don't need a car.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just add, I don't know if you've been to the building, but Mr. Sigmund maintains it. It is pristine, beautiful. If every apartment building of that age was kept as nicely as that, the world would be a better place. It's really a credit to the community that people should be building those kind of buildings
Thank you.
and maintaining them.
I agree. I have been there, and I agree. It's and thank you very much.
Councillor Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is, the current 2 floors are occupied right now? And if they are, what is happening to those tenants while you renovated and split it?
Current floor, the current, or the previous daycare, I mean?
No. The 5 units that are double
Oh,
units.
yeah. Well, they are now occupied. They are 3-bedroom units. So they have one bedroom on the bottom floor, and then the staircase to the next level, 2 bedrooms upstairs. So those could be converted. That was I did the application to convert them then, but they, of course, as they become vacant.
As they become vacant.
Yeah, not
As
so-
they become a vacant?
Yeah, of course, we can't throw anybody out. as long as we have tenants there, it's going to be there. But slowly, as one becomes vacant, we can convert that
Thank you.
one by one.
Any other questions, council, for the proponent? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I will now close the public portion of the meeting and ask if someone would put the recommendation on the floor, please. Councillor Tom, thank you. Councillor Perry, second. Comments or questions to either Mr. Rokos or Mr. Rumuno with respect to the report? Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. My question is about the parking and the number of parking units. I guess because it's the expectation is public transit will be used, but my concern is that that Mill Street isn't used for parking. So could you speak to the provision for parking?
Mr. Rumuno?
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I mean, it's obviously something that we'll take a look at further, and when we report back, we'll get into a bit more detail. But based on what we've seen in the existing zoning, they have sufficient parking supply. Previously, based on that parking rate and the additional 10 units, they would still meet that parking rate that was established in the previous bylaw. Our understanding, and speaking with the applicant's planner, that they've never had an issue with parking on site, but it's something that we'll ensure as we move forward with our final report to council. Again, based on the numbers, there is one space per proposed unit.
Councillor?
Thank you. Just so that when it comes back to us, you can ensure that Mill Street isn't going to, there's not going to be an issue on Mill Street. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from Mr. Rumuno, please? In that case, I'll call the vote on the motion. All in favor, please. Contrary? That passes, Madam Clerk. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming up, Ms. Levitt. We'll now proceed with the second item. Again, Marty.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The second application is for Ashland Holdings, Inc. at 13859, 13875, and 13887 Yonge Street. That's for an official plan amendment, a zoning bylaw amendment, and a draft plan of subdivision application. This is the second public planning meeting for this application. The initial one went in November of last year. And the property is on the east side of Yonge Street, north of Bloomington, and south of Hunter's Glen. It's 3 properties, and the subdivision is proposed on the 3 properties. So the applicant is now proposing 34 detached dwelling lots on the property, along with 3 open space blocks and a trail going north-south along Yonge Street. And to go along with that subdivision application are an official plan amendment, which has specific amendments to the density. Right now, 5 units per hectare are permitted in the cluster residential designation, and it is an increase to 8 units per hectare, which is being asked for. The building coverage, 12% is permitted of building coverage on the overall lands. That the applicant has asked for 12% as well, and that's not a change from what's permitted right now. And for the buffer from estate residential designations, the official plan requires a 35-meter buffer between the estate residential designation and the yards or the lot line of lots in the cluster residential designation. That is being proposed to be reduced as well. And I'll show you on the draft plan what the proposal is. And along with that is the zoning bylaw amendment application to rezone the subject lands from estate residential ER zone to detached dwelling second density R2 exception zone. As I mentioned before, this application previously went to the committee in November. It was on the public planning meeting on November 30th, 2015, and the initial application was for 42 detached dwelling units. And at that time, the council motion was that comments presented at the public planning meeting be addressed by Planning and Development Services in a comprehensive report outlining recommendations and options at a future public planning meeting. Now, full resubmission has not been done enough to evaluate it to the point where we could do a recommendation. So at this point, it's just an information report. The revised application has been reduced, the number of lots has been reduced from 42 to 34. And with that, the average size of the lots has gone up. Typical lots has gone from about 12.2 meters to 15.2 meters. There are a few lots that are outside that range, but most of the lots are now being proposed at 15.2 meters of frontage. And to go along with the Parks Department comment, to remove the east-west trail because it was not in the Trails Master Plan, that has been removed. This is what was initially proposed with the 42 units and the trail along the south side. The revised proposal is what's here, with slightly larger lots, 34 units instead of 42, and the trail has been removed as in accordance with the Parks Department. Preliminary comments are basically the same as what we had before, with the exception that the Parks Department comment has been removed. And those comments and things we are looking at include the compatibility with surrounding residential and Oak Ridges Moraine land uses, vegetation and naturalization, stormwater ponds, bioretention facilities, and grading and drainage, and as well as the Stage 2 archaeological assessment. Conclusions for this are with same as it was in the last public planning meeting. Staff will work with the applicant to finalize the outstanding technical matters and what was brought forward at the meeting tonight, and a comprehensive report with recommendations and options will be presented to Council for consideration and direction at a future General Committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Mr. Brito.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of committee, staff, and distinguished members of the public. My name is Claudio Bruto. I'm here on behalf of Ashland. Ashland is actually Fernbrook Homes, and representative of the company is here with me this evening, Mr. Patika. A little bit of history on this file. We did come back for a public meeting initially, and we heard loud and clear that there were too many units on the property, and our client had a look at it, and with their direction and working along with staff and having heard members of the public and also having met with the Raise group on several occasions, a determination was made by our client that at 34 units we could try to move forward with this particular application. As far as some of the other matters of concern, the east-west trail, we were able to deal with that quite readily, and we did remove it. The north-south trail remains on the property, and that is as per the town of Aurora's plan through the master trails plan. And so that has been maintained. As far as the environmental features and the bioswales, our engineers have looked at that. That's not going to change whether we're at 34 lots or 42 lots. So we're preparing the necessary reports for that. We are preparing the necessary reports for some of the other technical items that were raised as part of the first submission. What we really wanted to drill down on right now was, and the concern that I've heard loud and clear, was compatibility and the interface between the lots in this proposed subdivision and the subdivision to the north. And I want to speak a little bit to that. Our clients did increase the unit sizes to 50 feet, but more importantly, and I want to reiterate, all of those lots are in excess of many of the cluster residential lots that were previously approved in Aurora South, in that a lot of them, and in fact all of them, are over 50 meters in length. What we're also proposing on the north side, and if I may indulge the staff, if you can show the new plan, Marty. Yeah, the new plan, and then I'll ask you to go back to the photo. So what you'll see on the new plan in your screen is that there's a 10-meter private open space buffer, and that's to augment an existing heavily vegetated screen that takes into consideration the views that we are trying to protect from the established estate residential neighborhood to the north. So that is an existing hedgerow, very difficult to see through it. An additional 10 meters are being proposed to allow it to go to a natural vegetative state that's being controlled by the developer through a landmark agreement that the owner shall not manicure or put any buildings in that particular space. So that's a proposition to continue to further address the issue of the interface. The other matter that our client is looking into is how far forward we can put the houses on those lots so that they're closest to Street A, so that we continue to maintain a 35-meter buffer between the closest unit in this subdivision to the closest unit within the subdivision to the north. And I can say with some confidence, and we can look at the air photo now, if I can ask Mr. Rokos to go to that, you'll see, if we need to zoom in on that, please, if it's possible. Pardon me? Can't zoom in? Well, it's easy enough to see at Hunter's Glen how far forward those units are, and none of the units, in fact, are even close to the 35 meters that we're speaking about on the north side. And imagine, if you will, a living fence, a lot of trees, and so from my perspective, the proposal that you have in front of you adequately, if not more than adequately, addresses the issue of the interface and compatibility with the lots to the north, recognizing that this is a permitted use here, which is a cluster residential development. It's not now 42, but it is at 34 units. And I think that if we can get through that issue, I think that our client's hope is that we can come back to the next meeting with a recommendation for approval. And that's why we're here with you this evening. We're continuing the negotiations with staff. We'd like your feedback at this second public meeting as to the effort that our client has made. I think that there has been some appreciation from the residents group owners that I met with, Mr. McClure and Mr. Green, who are unfortunately not available this evening, but the group will be well represented, and I'm sure, and we'll continue the dialogue to see if we can't have a meeting of the minds in this particular subdivision. Those are really my submissions for this evening. I'd be happy to rise again if you had any questions of me, and to try and fill in some of the gaps. And I'll leave it at that unless there are some questions at this particular juncture.
Thank you, Mr. Brito. We'll now open it up to members of the public. If anybody would like to speak, please come up to the microphone. If you would give us your name and your address, and you have 5 minutes, sir.
My name is Paul Dransfield. I live at 2 Hunters Glen Road in Aurora. Mr. Mayor, members of council, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity to speak to the subject of Ashland Holdings, Inc. RAISE, the Ratepayers Association of York South, has strived over the years to ensure that development at the south end of Aurora is undertaken in a responsible manner. We recognize that a developer wants to maximize the return on their investment, but we do not agree that this should be done at the expense of exceptions to the official plan OP 34. That plan dictates a density of 2 units per acre, and it has been carefully crafted by the town of Aurora to address its growth needs while blending in with the existing neighboring developments. 6 other recent developments in the immediate neighborhood have all complied with OPA 34's density of 2 units per acre. High density in the area would not complement the estate residential configuration that is currently in place. The residents who have property on the south side of Hunters Glen purchased their homes and paid a premium for them to enjoy the privacy that their property afforded them. These homes are subject to a very high property tax. Should the adjacent Ashland Holdings development decrease this privacy, because there would be 3 or more new homes looking down on each of them with a minimal buffer zone, it would cause a significant decrease in the value of their investment. All other homes south of the Van Dorf side road could have their property values impacted if this development is allowed to go ahead as proposed. With respect to the Ashland Plan, we understand that besides the requested increase in density and zoning changes, there are still unanswered questions regarding any follow-up investigation on wildlife, both flora and fauna, that was promised in the Master Environmental Servicing Plan. We ask that these follow-up activities be completed before Council renders a decision. There are also many concerns regarding changes to the topography of the proposed building site, which sits directly on top of the Oak Ridge glacial deposit and is a very sensitive area to infiltration. Current residents are very concerned that this activity could affect the private wells that rely on water from this filtration site. Consideration has to be given to the possibility that their wells could be compromised, making their occupancy untenable, along with a plummeting value. With these risks in mind, we request that members of council adhere to the town's long-term plan, which includes infrastructure improvements designed to accommodate planned growth rather than an anomalous influx of houses that will impact and upset that plan. The practice of proposing developments which exceed the official plan is happening frequently today, and we implore council to resist setting a precedent which will be seized upon by future developers. In conclusion, we request that a decision on the application be delayed until a future date to provide the council time to hear from all those people affected by this application and also to consider whether this fits with the town's overall growth plan. Thank you for receiving this report.
Thank you, sir. Would anybody else care to come forward and speak with respect to this application, sir?
Hi, my name is Nima Oskuizadeh. We live in number 35 Hunters Glen Road, the very first property over there. I won't repeat the items that my neighbor mentioned. I had some of them in my comment as well. I want to mention a couple of other things essentially.
Excuse me, sir, could you get just a little bit closer to the
Closer
microphone?
to the mic. Apart from the precedence that this thing may set for the neighboring lot areas and land areas that is very concerning, I wanted to talk about, it's essentially very strange as to why we have to amend and change, at least I counted here, 6 bylaws just to accommodate this, this density. And the most troubling ones for me are the side yard size, main building height, floor area, and the lot coverage. These are very concerning as to why these bylaws should be, there should be an exceptions to them essentially, especially the building height. I also understand that Bill number 73 has been passed in December 2015, and I believe it gives extra power to the municipalities to, interpret and interact with the proposed changes to the bylaws and the plans, essentially. I believe the bill is called the Smart Growth for Our Communities Act, approved on year 2015. And I believe it also gives the power to even put a moratorium of up to 2 years for main changes to plans, essentially. I want to know whether the council is considering these things in their considerations, in their decisions, and any feedback on that would be great. I'm also concerned that I heard there's no full submission yet, and as my understanding is that there's going to be so many things in the details, and without seeing all those full submissions of the details, I guess, again, it makes us very uncomfortable going with this proposal, essentially. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other speakers from the public at this point? Mr. Bruto, perhaps you could address some of those issues, please. Density.
Thank you,
couple of
Mr. Mayor,
management
members
plans.
of committee, and I have made some notes on the comments that were put forth, and perhaps I'll start with the last comment first because it's fresh in my mind. I don't want anybody to leave with respect this evening thinking that we have not filed the necessary technical documents. In fact, we have filed the necessary technical documents. Our application is deemed under section of 51 of the Planning Act to be complete. And I'm going to draw your attention to the staff report, and perhaps members of the public can also follow this in page 15. The draft plan of subdivision filed, draft official plan amendment filed, draft zoning bylaw amendment was filed, a planning rationale report was filed, We filed urban design guidelines, a schedule of lot and blocks, a grading plan prepared by WSP Engineering, a functional servicing report prepared by WSP, geotechnical investigation prepared by WSP, a hydrogeological study, a noise report, a traffic report, an entrance analysis, a landform assessment and conservation study, the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan, environmental impact study, natural heritage evaluation, ORM conformity, Phase 1 environmental and a Phase 2, by the way, Stage 1 and a Stage 2 archaeology to address that point have been filed, a tree inventory has been filed, and a topographic survey. So I want to be very clear to Council that in fact we have filed an MESP document that is this thick, and I think I presented it to you. And I provided a copy to Ray's for their review. In fact, the staff of the municipality has circulated all of those documents to the town's peer reviewers. We have some preliminary comments back. We don't have all the comments. Our intention is to file an addendum. But from the circulation that I've seen thus far, and the studies and the conclusions, I can assure you that we have met all of the requirements of the Oak Ridges Moraine. This development will not impact on the Oak Ridges Moraine, but I'm not going to leave it to myself or to your staff. They have very competent peer reviewers that are going to give you the answers that you need as part of the recommendation report that will come before General Committee in the future. So I want to be very, very clear and assure you that we've filed all of the necessary documents and will continue to file documents to fill in the gaps, as it were, once the peer review comments come back. We have addressed some of the preliminary comments. We have done a Phase 2 archaeology study. There are no findings on the site. We have removed the trail. We have filed documentation with respect to biodiversity, drainage, swale. So we are meeting all of the requirements of the Oak Ridges Moraine. We understand that it's in the Oak Ridges Moraine, and we're being sensitive to it. With respect to densities, Mr. Ramuno has written a multitude of reports on density in Aurora South, not only on this development. If you go back to his first review, Mr. Roykos spoke to it. The densities of 2 units to the acre are not undertaken on a site-specific basis. They're undertaken on an area-wide basis, in this case, as part of this block. I demonstrated in my planning rationale report, and I invite the members of the public to review it. We are available to meet with them again. I think Mr. Ramuno is opening his door to meeting with them, and the density is looked at on an area-wide basis. So in fact, on an area-wide basis, when you put this cluster development into the hopper, in fact, the densities that are proposed for Aurora South, we cannot achieve the densities that have been recommended as part of the Aurora South Secondary Plan, OPA 34. So we are only looking at an amendment on a site-specific basis because that's the way your OP was drafted. If somebody comes in on a site-specific basis that shows more units than 2 UPH, then you do an official plan amendment. That's the only reason we filed an official plan amendment. From my planning perspective, we do conform. We conform with the original plan. Our clients have decided that they want to take a look at the interface, and they are listening to you, and they're listening to the public by reducing the number of units from 42 to 34. That's a significant change. So I've spoken to the 2 UPH. Contrary to what I heard, not all 6 applications in Aurora South conformed on point to the 2 UPH. Timberlane is an example. The Wycliffe Estates were an example on Van Dorf where we were involved. So there are a lot of examples that I believe the planning department can draw the residents' attention to demonstrate that it's done on an area-wide basis rather than on a site-specific basis. Wildlife fauna, we have a very extensive report that I spoke to earlier that is available in the MESP, that is in the possession of the residents group, and we are happy to have our environmental people sit down with the RAISE group and demonstrate the findings of our biologists. With respect to the ORM sensitivity, our reports do address those in considerable detail, and they are subject to an ongoing peer review. This development will not set a precedent. This development is in conformity with the densities for Aurora South as prescribed in your official plan. It's not contrary to the official plan. With respect to the zoning bylaw, those are site-specific amendments that are not unusual in Aurora South. Brookfield is another example coming forward with their zoning bylaw amendment. Cluster development is very site-specific, and so we seek those amendments to fit the unit types within the lots. At the end of the good long day, this will be a cluster-type development with significant buffers between this development and Hunter's Glen. That's the main sensitivity. There is no transportation interconnectivity between this development and Hunter's Glen. There is no visibility between this development and Hunter's Glen. It'll have its own servicing and its own public road. So we think we've addressed the sensitivity. We are still available to speak to the residents. We've enjoyed the collaboration and the interaction. I don't mean to sound like I've got my heckles up a little bit, but I don't want to leave the perception that our work is incomplete. Far from it. That's not the way Fernbrook does their business. It's not the way I conduct my business. We're here for the second public meeting to continue to get feedback, and we're all ears. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brito.
And I'm here to answer any questions from council if need be.
We'll get there, I'm sure. I'll go back to any members of the public who would like to speak again, and you're certainly welcome to speak a second time if you would like to.
One more point.
Well, hold on, you have to give us your name and address again, sir.
Okay. Nima Osquizadeh, 3500 Glen Road. I forgot to mention the previous round that one of the main issues that I see with the proposal is the change of the minimum distance separation to the estate residential designation. There's a big difference between having 35 meter between the estate residential border and the limit of the cluster residential unit versus the proposed change of 35 meter between the house in estate residential and the house within a cluster residential. This by itself is a very, very big difference, and I want to make sure that this is considered one of the points that I want to say that is part of my objections to this proposal.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other members of the public? Mr. Bruto, could you speak to that particular issue, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, members of council. It is a relevant issue, and I was involved in the original preparation of the secondary plan, OPA 34. That provision was undertaken in respect of the Coots application on Ridge Road, where there was a requirement because of ORM provisions, but more importantly because there was no vegetation that would buttress the impact of the interface between the units on Ridge Road and the units in the Coots development. It was thought that 35 meters from the property line would be sufficient. In this case, not only will we be 35 meters between buildings, but I could venture to say that if you look at the air photo, the units on Hunter's Glen are stable. We don't see redevelopment occurring, and in fact, many of the units there are already 35 meters removed from their rear property line. So from my perspective, it's almost like overkill. So we will end up having about 70 to 80 meters between the residential units that are being proposed by Fernbrook and those that are currently situated on Hunter's Glen. So in a roundabout way, we actually end up with more separation distance under the provisions of this bylaw than we did under the original, sort of the genesis of the bylaw that was developed for Coots, the OP that was developed for Coots. So, and not only that, but there is significant mature vegetation that has grown on the Hunter's Glen rear yards, and we are also proposing vegetation on the Fernbrook rear 10 meters. So I think that goes a long way to allaying some of the concern, but I do understand the expression. I'm not suggesting for a moment that it isn't a real concern, because things are changing. This is an infill that is slated for this particular property. It has permissions by way of the official plan that's already in place, and we're doing our utmost to ensure that the character of the community doesn't change. But the biggest factor is that there is no connection between Hunter's Glen and this particular subdivision. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bruto. Any other members of the public care to speak at this point? Okay, so I'll ask members of council, do you have any questions for the proponent on this particular application? Councillor Kim. Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Bruto, the buffer area between the proposed housing units and current residential, can you tell me, I think I overheard one of the residents say that looking over my backyard, how, can you describe the grade between the Hunter's Glen and the development area, please?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, Councillor Kim, that's a very good question, and in fact, we're on the crest of the Oak Ridges moraine here, where the lands are actually sloping southerly. So our property, the Fernbrook property, is actually a lower grade than the Hunter's Glen. And in fact, when we developed the road, to be able to drain those lots from a sanitary perspective from north to south to get to the sanitary sewer on our Street A, the grades will be lowered even further. The height that we're seeking is not an unusual height. It's pretty typical of a two-story style of house in this particular subdivision. So the rooftops of these houses, will they be visible? They will be visible, but they will not be towering over Hunter's Glen, not whatsoever.
Councillor?
And you know what? I've never been in that lot before. Can you clarify in terms of the height of the existing vegetation on that buffer area, please?
And I can reference our report, but I would say to you that the height of the vegetation, the more mature vegetation, is exceeding 10 to 15 meters in many instances. And there's a large understory as well, a very thick understory. So if you're standing on the Fernbrook property, you cannot see through to Hunter's Glen. And
Thank you.
I think, sir, my apologies for interjecting, that we're going to add another 10 meters of native species to further buttress that visibility if it exists.
Okay. And lastly, I could ask Director Maruno as well, but while you're up, in terms of from the existing official plan policy and the proposed with regards to the minimum distance separation, there just seems to be some slight verbiage variation. I'm just wondering if you can just clarify. The existing policy was 35 meters between an estate residential designation and the limit of a cluster residential unit amenity space versus the proposed 35-meter between a house in an estate residential designation and a house with a cluster residential designation. Is the difference between in the proposed is the distance is measured from structure, like building structure, to structure, whereas before it was the limits of the boundaries of these zones, or?
So if I could turn to the plan of subdivision, I think that would be helpful to explain. And I know you're going to get the detail from Mr. Ramuno in the follow-up report, but there you go, that one. So Street A, let's look at, for instance, Lot 4. Lot 4 is about 55 meters in length. On a subdivision like this, we're going to want to give some generous driveway, and we see the setback being approximately 10 meters, so you can fit 2 cars, maybe 3 cars. So now we've taken 10 meters of the 55 meters for a driveway. The house itself might be in the range of 60 feet, so another 15 to 16 meters. So now we're 25 meters back, and we've still got another 30 meters to the rear fence, as opposed to 35. That's the real difference. But now we look at the existing residents and where they're situated on Hunter's Glen, there's probably another 35 to 40 meters before you get to the back built wall. The issue and what the OP tried to address was backyard amenity space, that the amenity space be removed 35 meters from the property line. So what we're suggesting here is the amenity space for these units, because they're not townhouses and it's not a lot of people living in there, or it's not an apartment building where you're generating a lot of noise, is that the backyard amenity space of a single-family residential unit in the Fernbrook development is very similar to the types of activities that you can expect at Hunter's Glen. So there might be a pool, there might be a gazebo, an expansive lawn, and the 10 meters of buffer. So I believe that we can address the outdoor enjoyment of outdoor amenity space as between Hunter's Glen and Fernbrook. That was really sort of the thinking behind the 35 meters.
Councillor?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, again to you, Mr. Bruto. I think your client is to be commended for making the changes that they did. They obviously heard some of the concerns from the November 30th meeting and made some significant changes. I think one of the suggestions that was brought up was, it was to have larger lots on the northern side and maintain, smaller lots on the southern side to kind of have it, the variation be less noticeable from Hunter's Glen. How much of, has that been considered? And I think it was mentioned about the Aurora Estates and how that's going and how that was mispriced. Can you just remind us again in terms of how the Aurora Estates is doing and how that has impacted your client's decision and widening and creating bigger homes on the north side?
Yes, Councillor Kim.
I'm not sure it would be appropriate for Mr. Bruto to comment on another development.
I'm not going to comment on
Okay.
Aurora, but I do want to comment on Councillor Kim's first inquiry about what we've done to improve the interface condition. And what we did do is go from 40 footers to 50 footers. When we looked at perhaps even doing larger lots on the north side, it became apparent that we would have to, in order to get to a reasonable number, the 34 units, we would achieve a much lower number if we did like 60 and 70 footers on the north side and 40 footers. And from Fernbrook's community design perspective, that's something that they're not in the habit of doing, to create a proper living environment where you have 70 footers and 40 footers on the same street. So they looked at it both from the neighbor's perspective and their own perspective, and the compromise that they came up with was 50s all across the board, and to be able to move some of the units on the north side a little closer to the road if need be, and to introduce the 10-meter buffer on the north side. So that's how we've managed to get down to the 34 units and to have 50 across the board. So when you drive into Fernbrook, you also have a nice looking community.
Councillor?
Yeah, and final question. Can you gauge in terms of your client whether there's flexibility in having a wider lot, maybe even 60 all around?
My client is here, through you, Mr. Mayor, and he will listen to this evening's deliberations. My client has partners, so they'll sit down just as they did last time and take your thoughts into consideration on some wider lots. But I can tell you at 34 units, it was a I don't say struggle. I think it was a rational decision to work with council and members of the public as to whether or not there's an appetite to go back. We'll take it back, and they'll take it to the partners and see whether there's any more room. I'm not going to say no flat out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got Councillors Gartner, Puri, and Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll save my questions for staff.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Puri.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Mr. Rudo. I see 3 different stormwater management ponds.
Yes.
Any thought to incorporating LIDs instead of those? They're less costly to do, cheaper for maintenance from our perspective.
Yes, Councillor Peary, through you, Mr. Mayor. We are in fact looking at reducing or eliminating, particularly on the Yonge Street side, one of those ponds if we're able to do so. But I can assure you also these will be low maintenance. They're never going to have water in them. So the maintenance cost anticipated on these is low, but you're absolutely right. There's a lot of ponds, and that's the way it's been designed right now. So we are looking at that.
And when was, it, to the best of your knowledge, what date did you initially submit your application? Because it's gone on for a while now, and I know that there's typically a 180-day limit, so just...
To the best of my recollection, Councillor Peary, through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe we filed in April of last year, so we're coming on 1 year. We're happy to be here at the second public meeting because that's a practice of council, and it's a good practice. We can continue to vet the major issues here, which I'm still sensing is the density, and but we do want to get on with things. Our client likes to work with the municipality and achieve a resolution, and we see a resolution within our sites, and hopefully you do as well, and members of the public, without having to resort to going to the municipal board. We are within that window, but we're not contemplating that at this juncture.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Brutal, thank you very much. Some of your details is impressive, and I, when you're doing the studies, and you certainly have been before this council and many before, I'm not, but the one detail that I have that it seems to be the one that I commented on before is the OP34 and the density. So it's very clear that we have clustered about when a property applies, it still maintains the 2 units per acre, and that's within a property. Now, within this property, that's not, you're calling it a cluster. I would not, in my mind, call it a cluster, but you're saying if you look overall at other properties. So my question to you, Mr. Brito, do you own those other properties that you're saying, well, if you take that whole mass and then put this in it, it will go out? Because in my mind, you are not going to develop in those lands. So if they're not your properties, I'm just wondering how it is that you can address my concern with the density in this case.
Okay, Councillor Abel, through you, Mr. Mayor. I'm able to address it in as much as your staff's already done a very good job. When Timberlane came to this floor and they did an analysis of the remaining lots in Aurora South to be able to justify that cluster, I think on a site-specific basis it came in at 5 UPH, I believe, some number like that, but I'm not going to comment. But it was certainly more than 2. What they did, and put before you, was that they looked at all the lots that were proposed as part of OPA 34 for this particular block. This block, as you know, encompasses these lands and a few other vacant parcels south of this area. If we had a map of Aurora South, I can demonstrate that to you, but I think you're familiar with it. We know, by and large, your staff has advised us of how many acres are left to accommodate some 300 units in the Aurora South area. If these lands at 10 acres, which are pretty much fully developable, end up at 34 units, we know that there's probably room for another 100 units on the rest of Aurora South based on the high-level mapping that was done as part of the designation of environmental features in OPA 34. So there is a calculation that is available, and I think Mr. Okos and Mr. Ramuno are going to re-avail themselves of that study and perhaps study it even further to come up with that answer that you're seeking from your experts. We also have some familiarity. We've been approached by developers to the east and landowners to the east to do a preliminary assessment on some of their lands in terms of how many units might fit in those lands, and it's a very limited amount. There may be about, I would say, maybe 40 to 45 acres left. So even if you were at 3 acres or 3 units on a site-specific basis to the acre on those lands, you're still going to come in under the projection for OPA 30 for this block. And so therefore, on an area-wide basis, you're in conformity with OPA 34. But I'll leave it to staff to address that. I think that'll form part of the analysis. And I know that the residents, Ray's was asking for that analysis. I'd rather that come from staff because they've already done a fair amount of work in that regard. But I'm very satisfied with that result. And that's what brings us to this today, for me to be able to say unequivocally that we're in conformity, whether we were at 42 or at 34.
Thank you for answering the question.
Council, any other comments or questions for Mr. Bruto? Okay, then I will close the public portion of the meeting. Thank you very much, Mr. Bruto, and I will open it up for the discussion on the motion. Linda, if you could put that up for us, please. If someone would move that so we could talk about it. Councillor Peary, thank you. Is there a second? Councillor Gartner, thank you.
No, Mr. Mayor, I'm not seconding that.
Well, then, don't put your hand up yet.
I wanted to change the motion, but
Well,
Councillor
not
Perry
yet.
beat me to it.
Councillor Peary? Councillor Peary's moved it already, and Councillor Thompson is seconding it. Councillor Gartner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'll just start at page 1. I would have asked for this to come back to another public planning meeting simply because of what we asked for at the first public planning meeting. We asked for a lot of, that's on page 7. We asked for staff to provide us greater detail on a lot of reports. And what Mr. Bruto said seems true from the report, that the developer has presented, I think it's 18 or 19 reports, but staff did say that a full evaluation hasn't been done. And I would hope, because of the nature of this development and the potential it has really for setting precedent in this area and infringing on the rights of the, certainly the property to the north, that we would have all of these answers back at a public planning meeting. I wasn't fast enough on the draw for that, but I am disappointed that we didn't wait until we had a full evaluation of all of the submissions that the developer made so that we could fully make a decision on this. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Muno, according to OPA 34, if we were to have the 2 units per acre or the 5 units per hectare, how many units would be allowed on this land?
Mr. Middle.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the site is just over 10 acres, so it would be over 21 lots based on the 2 units per acre.
I think it's, thank you, I think it's 20 and change on the low end, but so, and that isn't what we have before us. And I will remind council, and you know, I'm sorry, you're going to get really tired of hearing me say this, but we spent $600,000 in 2000 to defend our OPA 34, this part, and it went to the OMB, and we won. We were allowed to uphold our planning policy. So if it says 20.5 units per acre, I think that's what this council should go with. With respect to the chart on page 4, perhaps through you to Mr. Muno. The building, the third one down, the building coverage, 12% of all lands within cluster residential designation. First of all, I do agree with Councillor Abel. I wouldn't call this a cluster development. To me, and I believe the definition is that if you have some environmental landforms, instead of using the whole area of the development, you cluster the residential so it doesn't infringe upon the natural environment. But with respect to, if we're going to look at this chart as it's written, 12% of all lands within cluster residential designation, and then the proposal is 12% of all lands within constrained and unconstrained lands. Could you speak to that?
Mr. Middle.
What exactly is the difference there?
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Mayor, the official plan 34 has a policy that says, 2 units an acre, but also from a building coverage standpoint, that 12%, there's a 12% coverage. And again, it's not on a lot-by-lot basis, but the way the plan was structured, it's for the entire the lands that are identified as clustered residential. So this chart really identifies what the existing policy is, and based on this revised plan, the column to the right, we've identified what the applicant is requesting with respect to amendments to the OP, an increase in density, and of course, likely, and we haven't taken a good look, they'll need an increase in the lot coverage, that 12%, as well as the 35-meter separation distance between estate residential designations, with, Mr. Bruto provided an explanation for, and I can elaborate on that if council wishes.
Councillor.
The 35-meter, if I'm wrong, please tell me, that means to me that there has to be 35 meters between a neighboring estate residential, and it has to be provided. It can't be because there's a lot of trees on a neighboring property that can be counted as part of the 35, that it has to be provided by the developer of the particular subdivision.
Mr. Muno, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the way the policy is worded, it says a 35-meter buffer between an existing estate residential designation property line and the cluster, and the future cluster residential. So, as Mr. Claudio has explained, you could have a situation, and we've seen that in the original Coots application, where you had a cluster residential development, the proposed buildings, within 35 meters of the property line, of the state residential property line.
Thank you, but the intent is that,
In this situation, they are also seeking an amendment to that provision to provide that 35 meters between the existing dwellings.
thank you. So the intent is if I have a property and I've built a house on it, and I've provided a 35-meter separation between that and the next property, the adjoining property, that adjoining property also has to uphold that 35-meter separation before they can build any structures on their property?
Mr. Muno?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, again, this policy relates to the OPA 34, specifically the cluster residential, future cluster residential designation. So they are definitely asking for, they will need an amendment to that provision.
Thank you. So putting a pool or tennis court or whatever close up to somebody's property line, that's what the developer's asking for, to be able to use that space instead of having it as privacy space, to use it for amenities.
I don't follow that, Councillor. Are you talking about the 10-meter?
Well, I'm trying to follow what Mr. Bruto said. He said something about, somebody could have a pool in the backyard and it wouldn't interfere with the neighbor's property, even though it might not be 35 meters away from the property line?
Perhaps with your, if I could rephrase your
Please.
question, it should be, the back of the new proposed house should be 35 meters from the property line. Is that?
Thank you. And does that also include a pool and a tennis court and whatever amenities
Would
they
that
want to provide?
include amenities?
Well, the way, through you, Mr. Mayor, the way the policy was worded, it said the new development amenity space area had to be 35 meters, there had to be a distance of 35 meters between the existing estate residential property line.
So that means there had to be 35 meters between the existing property before the new property could build a pool. There had to be a 35-meter buffer zone, in other words. That's what it's saying at the moment.
That would apply to the new development, correct.
Thank you. On page 5, with respect, it's an ER zone at the moment. I don't know, and I meant to email you, I'm sorry. What are the lot parameters, et cetera, for an ER zone? This is existing, an ER zone at the moment?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I may, just to clarify, because there were some questions from the audience with respect to the requested exceptions to the residential zone to implement this development. As we've seen in every development in OPA 34, because all those undeveloped lands were zoned either historic rural or in this case an ER, there would always be a rezoning required and amendments, exceptions to those zones, because we don't have a cluster residential type zone standard in our current zoning bylaw. So every development would have to be tailored, and the zoning would have to be tailored to that development. So what the chart on 5 shows is that this current site is zoned estate residential. They're requesting the appropriate R2 zone, which is what I believe we've been using elsewhere in OPA 34. And these are the requested exceptions or standard provisions to that R2 zone. The estate residential zone, I'm not sure if Marty has it. There are different lot frontage and lot area requirements for those zones, and the lot coverage, my recollection is there's a 15% lot coverage in the existing ER zone. But again, to implement this cluster residential designation, there would be a new zone for those lands and new standards.
Do you want to go to Marty for a question?
Thank you.
Just a second, Councillor. I was going to go to Mr. Ruppos for an answer.
Do you have the zoning provisions for the ER?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do have the ER zoning provisions. The minimum lot area is 8,000 square meters. The minimum lot frontage is 45 meters. And the minimum or maximum lot coverage is 15%.
Councillor.
Thank you. So it's a really big change. I believe the planner said that there was going to be significant buffers between this development and the adjoining one. I don't really see very much in the way of buffers. Could you speak to that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what Mr. Bruto spoke to and what his revised plan identifies for the north side of the proposed street is to provide a dual zone. The northern portion would have a dual zone, which would be an open space zone with a width of 10 meters is what they're proposing, with additional plantings. So that's what he's referring to. So those northern lots would have a dual zone, the northern zone, an open space, 10 meters, additional planting. He hasn't, we don't necessarily have those details yet, but that's what they are proposing to add to the buffering between the existing estate residential lots on Hunter's Glen and this proposed development.
Councillor, I'm going to ask you to hold your questions for your second turn, just see if there's anyone else who would has some input on this. Councillor Thompson. Councillor Tom.
Thank you, Mayor Dodd. Through to Mr. Ramuno. Mr. Ramuno, can you just sort of take us back to OPA 34? It kind of helped for myself when we were dealing with a previous application. We had that map on the that sort of identified the various developments, the acreage, the units, and sort of gave a scope of what was remaining to be developed and not. So I was just trying to look up. In terms of the numbers, there was still a fair bit of land that's to be developed or designated to be developed, but just in general overview, in terms of the OPA and the density conversation, there's still, I think when we approved OPA, it was like 700 units to be developed, I think, or can you just give a brief background?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor. That's correct, Councillor Thompson, and that's what Mr. Bruto was referring to, and I did provide a detailed analysis with respect to the OPA 34 and the ultimate numbers projected and what we've seen to date in a previous report related to my recommendation on the Timberlane application. As Council is aware, OPA 34 was developed back in the late 90s, adopted early 2000s, and it was an environment-first approach at that time at a low density of 2 units an acre on a cluster residential designation in a block area perspective. It also had similar policies that we've referred to with respect to maximum lot coverage, separation distance. But the point of the cluster residential designation was at the time that the plan was developed, and it was really, I think, at the same time or in response to private applications that we received on the west side of Yonge Street, which were the initial application from the Elderberry development and the Coots development. And the knowledge at that point was that there were a lot of environmental features within that area, and the designation and policies that were arrived at were 2 units on a gross basis. In that you would calculate any environmental lands that weren't developable as part of your density calculation. The other broader policy or vision within OPA 34, as most documents, official plans do provide for, is an ultimate population or unit count based on the inventory that was done at that time, and that was that 700 unit projection, ultimately, 700 new units within OPA 34. And I think what I reported on earlier, and I think what Mr. Bruto referred to is that, and I will certainly provide that additional information moving forward, was that we have seen, between the Coots application, the first development in OPA 34 was the Ascot Village, the old Elderberry development, which was about 60 units. Over at Bathurst and Ballymore, we saw another, I think it was 50 or 60 units. Previous council approved the parcel development application, which was about 22 units. It's still undeveloped. The Coots, recently council approved that, just under 200 units. There are a couple other parcels that we've received applications for surrounding the Coots application, and that number is less than 100. And Mr. Bruto's block plan for the west side identified less than approximately 300 units. We haven't seen much on the east side. This is the second application. The first application was Davina Circle, Sterling Cook application. That was 21 plus 6, about 27 units. The only other undeveloped parcels where we haven't received applications really are there are a couple small parcels on the west side of Yonge Street. On the east side, we have a small parcel north of Hunter's Glen, and the larger land holding within OPA 34 that does have cluster residential designation and permission are those lots, those long lots fronting onto Old Bloomington. And I think the number, I think Mr. Bruto mentioned about 40 or 50 acres. I think that's roughly correct. My recollection is about 60 or 70 acres in total, should they ever be developed. So if you did the numbers based on the 2 units an acre, what I reported on earlier was that we're not near that 700 unit population projection at this point. And again, as I mentioned to council, I haven't provided a fulsome report at this point. It's really just information report. But anytime I have brought a report forward on any application, specifically here within the 34 area, I will do it based on a complete review of all the background studies. And in this instance, I just want to clarify as well, we have received all the background studies required. Marty did mention in his presentation that we haven't received any addendum reports yet. I think what he means by that is, even though the application has been revised, the unit count has been lowered. The original applications were submitted and all the background reports based on the 42 units. I don't foresee having the applicant to amend any of that environmental report based on a revised application where we see a decrease in lots at this scale. What we may see is based on some comments that we get from our environmental peer reviewers who are looking at some of the environmental reports. They may ask for additional information, and I think that's what we mean when we're requesting addendum reports or additional information in response to clarification that our peer reviewers may seek from the applicant's environmental consultants. So having said that, again, the overall vision of OPA 34 was about 700 units, cluster residential, and the intent of the clustering the residential was to ensure that the environmental features were protected. And again, there was a range of unit types permitted, ranging from singles, semis, and towns.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Unfortunately, Councillor Thompson, Mr. Ramuno, you used up all your time.
Just a quick comment. I guess where my thought is that this application is part of a larger block, as you indicated, that the block surrounding it is 60 to 70 acres. This one's 10 acres. If all of the landowners within that block were looking for that same sort of increase, I'd like to know whether or not that puts us over those 700 units or not. And so it would be good going forward to have that map similar to we did with other applications, because I'd like to know how does that impact what previous councils did for OPA 34.
Mr. Ramuno?
Certainly, through you, Mr. Mayor. We'll definitely do that, and I have taken a look at that, and again, I'll provide that earlier report, the map that we referred to, and I don't want to presuppose what we may see from future applications, but I don't think we're going to approach that 700 unit projection in OPA 34 based on this application, which is just a proposal before us, or even a slight increase in any density increases on the rest of the block on the east side. However, I just want to clarify that, I understand the concern that we hear around the table about setting a precedent, but, I just want to assure council that anytime I do bring forward a report to council, I'm evaluating that individual application on its merits. And if I do bring forward a recommendation on any application, it'll be based on, my review of the current policy framework we have before us and the circumstances around that application, the suitability of that proposal for that area and all the other factors, specifically the environmental issues, if there are any, on the property. But we'll certainly, in a future report, we will provide that previous information surrounding the history and what development we have seen and what's left within the secondary plan area.
Councillor Thompson. Councillor John.
Thank you, Mayor Daw. And Councillor Thompson's questions and Mr. Ramuno's answer did alleviate some of my concerns. I would look forward to getting that map that Councillor Thompson mentioned, Mr. Ramuno, for the next report. I'm okay with this moving to committee, but I would like to see both that map and some additional information with respect to some of the residents' concerns. And also, one thing I'd like to see, perhaps in a map, if it's possible, is with respect to the distance separation between the estate designation. The request is to have it 35 meters between a house in the ER designation and a house in the cluster designation. Is it possible to show with an overhead map the existing homes and where 35 meters would reach to with respect to the proposed subdivision that we see before us? I think that would be important to see for council to be able to visualize what impact that change would have. So, I'm a visual person. I think that would be hugely important for me moving forward to committee for the next report. And that would be my only request. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Tom. Other speakers, please. Councillor Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And, I remember on the cluster situation last term on the west side, the Rays Association challenging our cluster calculation. You take a piece of property, there are features there that are protected, they were given as green space, and therefore we were allowed to put a higher density at one of the other ends or in another area of their property. And a lot of the arguments were that, and it's quite clear that you shouldn't include in the acreage the features that are protected. But we did, and we defended that, and what we were given was, we were given parkland and open space for those clusters. And this is a different one. So, and there's no accompanying, in the report, there's nothing to accompany what is going on around and how we've changed our calculation. So I'm not sure the lot that was given in Heritage Trust north of the school and south of McClellan Way, it's a big lot that was given to the Heritage Trust.
Casewood lot.
No, not the case, further south.
Oh, the Bartley Smith?
Yeah. So, I mean, you could then say, well, you know what, you're not developing in there yet. So I'm going to say that you're going to have enough green space, so I'm going to cluster my whole property here, and that's what I see here. So I'm really having a tough time defending this cluster because the applicant is using the free space on someone else's property that's not yet developed. And so that's what I'm really struggling with. And if I don't have something in front of me showing me what those neighborhood lots are, this means absolutely nothing to me. All I see is a maximization of the property that is before the application. If it was his property that was adjacent to it, and he's saying, you know what, I'm going to give this to green because there's features here, and it's going to be hard to connect because when you go on Old Bloomington, it's so far north. I mean, I have no clue. And then this new idea of counting the overall 700 units. This is the first I've heard of it. This in the calculation. It may have been presented before, Mr. Ramuno, through you, Mr. Mayor, but I don't recall it. I recall each property coming forward. So you know, when the applicant came with 42 units, I'm like, well, I'm seeing 21, he's doubling. And referring to it as a cluster, I don't see it as a cluster, so I'm still not satisfied to my, that this is a cluster unit, one, I'm not accepting that, and two, that it's beyond the densities that everywhere else I've been satisfied, with the one exception on a connecting road on Van Dorp, but take away that, everything else in this area has been met with that density. So I can't support it until I am satisfied that that density is there. So that's a challenge for me, and I can't support it.
Thank you, Councillor. The speakers, please. Second time, Councillor Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. OPA 34 cluster residential, it's all very complicated. And even after all this time, it's obvious that I don't completely understand it. But what I see is that the developer came in with a proposal for 42 units. And then they did take it down to 34. But under the OPA 34, they really would only be allowed 21. And no matter how you look at it, the character of the community to the north, the Hunters Glen community, is really going to be changed if we allow this density. And it won't only be their community, it'll be the Elderberry development. This is a significant change to the area, and I don't think that council should approve it. I will be voting against it.
Other speakers, please. Mr. Ramon, I've got a couple of questions. With Linda, could you go back and put up the draft plan of subdivision, please? And if you could go to page 24. Well, our page 24, which our continuous page 24. It's up there, so thank you, Linda. So at the end, at the east end of the property, block 48 walkway, could you tell us exactly what that is? What's a walkway to where?
Certainly, to you, Mr. Mayor, what the applicant has identified is, calling it a walkway, but it's really a servicing easement. So he's providing a protection or the ability for the water and sewer connection to the eastern edge of the property line to service the future lots immediately to the east. And this is, again, what's been submitted by by Mr. Bruto. This is something that staff is going to want to take a look at, and it really speaks to the discussion earlier on that Councillor Abel and Thompson referred to about the overall developments within this area. At this point, I don't think I can support a servicing connection, because the way I see the balance of that area north of Old Bloomington, and I'll step back a second. None of the property owners along Old Bloomington have, to my knowledge, come into the planning department to discuss any of their future development plans. Based on the official plan, a majority of their property at this northern limit is vegetated. There's an environment.
Excuse me, Linda, could you go back a couple of slides?
The OP map, please. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That'll illustrate it a little better.
No, one full.
State.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nope. You had it.
And then I'll ask you to go back to the OP map. So again, just to clarify, the area in red is the 10 acres of the Ashland holding. There are no environmental features on the property. It's tableland, and that speaks to the sort of cluster designation. It's all residentially designated. Immediately to the east, those long, narrow lots, what we refer to as string bean lots, they all have frontage onto Old Bloomington, and there's approximately 20 of those individual lots of similar size that stretch east, and most of those have existing dwellings. Back to your photo, please.
Yeah, that's
Okay, sorry. and they all have dwellings fronting onto Old Bloomington. So if this area were to develop, and you heard me say this, in the past, we would actually need a comprehensive development plan from a number of those owners, not just one or two of those, to see how that area is going to develop, how they're going to get servicing to them. So really, the development that should take place there would be, focused along north side of Old Bloomington, and hence, clustered development along the south side, because you can see the vegetation to the north side. If you can flip back to the OP map, please. And again, the OP map, the environmental schedules were done on a larger scale back in the late 90s, but you can see the diagonal hash marking identifies the lands that are designated for future cluster residential. What's in bold is the subject application. It has a entirely cluster residential designation. That horizontal hashing references a environmental protection area because it really identifies the wooded areas on site. Now again, we haven't seen any individual environmental reports on those lands, but that's what I would expect when those landowners come forward. So long story, I'll cut it short. I don't think I will be supporting a servicing connection through this proposal to the lands to the east. At this point, they're not going to be landlocked. They have access along Old Bloomington, and they would have to get their servicing access, servicing from Yonge Street along Old Bloomington. Again, I haven't dealt with any of those developers at this point. We're dealing with the Ashland application. It is a 10-acre block that it's isolated on its own with no environmental features. So, and that's why we accepted the application, and I'm comfortable with dealing this application on its own merits, and we will deal with any future applications to the east when they come in on a comprehensive basis.
Thank you, Mr. Romano. Council, any other comments or questions for Councillor Perry? And I'm sorry, Councillor Humphreys? I'll go with Councillor Perry, then Councillor Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Mr. Ramuno, I've heard a couple councillors say that they're not going to approve anything tonight. It was my understanding that we're not approving anything tonight, period. We're just choosing to move it forward to a GC where we'll get a fulsome report, and at that point we'll decide whether or not we want to move forward with the application. But right now, all we're deciding is whether or not we're going to move this to a general committee meeting, get a fulsome report from staff, and then I think we're all in a good position to make a decision either for or against at that point in time, but we're not making decisions tonight. Can I get confirmation of that?
Mr. Romano.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. The recommendation before you in the report is if council directs me to come back with to a GC with a comprehensive report and a recommendation, I will do that. I will only come back once we have completed our review of all the background reports, and certainly during that time we'll continue to meet with the applicant, the residents, and when I do come back with a report, we will address all the concerns we've heard here tonight. I've heard some of the concerns. I'll try and address as many as possible, and I've also heard some of the concerns with the number of lots still being too high, being 34, and I will sit down with the applicant and we will have that discussion. But my report will be a fulsome report, and I will also provide the history that I've provided previously to council on the developments that we've seen to date and what's left within OPA 34.
Councillor?
And just to finish off, I do think moving forward to a general committee makes sense. The applicant's been at this a year now. One way or another, I think we need to bring closure to this file, either by accepting it moving forward or by declining it, but that's a decision for another day.
I have Councillor Humphreys, then Councillor Abel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate the last part of the discussion. I agree with what's been said. I believe it needs to come to GC for final decision one way or the other. And I know that everyone's heard the concerns, and I do feel that there's just too many lots still. And if we can adhere to our OP, I think that will help everyone make the right decisions for this development. Just one quick question. Davina Circle, not to get into a lot of the history there, but basically the same acreage, maybe more. Notice there's only 20 one lots there. Did we, I don't know if that was part of us, I can't remember, but we obviously made them adhere to those standards and have a real tough time giving any exception to neighboring developments. So for me, let's try to keep it consistent across the board, and there's no deviation, and hopefully we'll have a beautiful development.
Thank you, Councillor Abel. With your indulgence, I'll go to Councillor Kim for first time.
Actually, is it first there or second?
First.
Oh, first then this one.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to clarify. I know there's some questions, and we've heard this, in the last year or so. With other applications, we've heard, why are developers allowed to make changes to our bylaws and official plans, and those are the same questions that we at council have confronted ourselves, and I know it was stated earlier that back in 2000. There was an issue, there was an application that went to the board and we won, and that was back in 2000. But we have to, keep in mind that that was a different time, and that was prior to, in 2005 we had the Greenbelt legislation, and in 2006 we had the Places to Grow, which really allowed for the density, and that's the regime we live in today. It's much different from 2000, so we can't expect the same result should this evolve further. The best solution is when both builder and existing residents work together. I think we've found that out in the past, in the recent past. Otherwise, you might get a result that's, that's not highly desirable. The reason why the province allows for an amendment process for the OP is to accommodate the current OP to be updated to the changing pressures of the time. So essentially, an OP is a guideline. We create it for our municipalities, and other municipalities create their OP, for them as a guideline. But the province allows us to amend it, in fact, encourages it, because our OP has to match up with their vision. Their vision doesn't match it with our vision, and so. As much as we'd like to do everything that we want for our town, there's limits to what we can do. So I hope that the residents' concerns have been made, and I think council concerns have been made. And I don't think I agree with some of the others who've responded that I don't think a third public planning session is necessary. I think. We're getting there. I think there's a willingness on the part of the builder to be flexible, and again, the final decision is going to be made at GC, and I think it's best to have it instead of going to a slow crawl, because really, when there's really no pressure to make a decision, nothing really happens, and it just gets drawn out. So I'm happy to move this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kim. Councillor Abel.
And thank you. Exactly. I've made my concerns very clear. I appreciate where you're going with that. And I won't be supporting it at GC as I see it, but let's move on.
Thank you, Councillor Abel. Any other comments or questions? The motion on the floor is to move this forward to GC with a comprehensive report. All in favor? Contrary? That's carried, Madam Clerk. Thank you very much for coming out. And again, if you want to make sure that you're notified, please take one of the forms from Linda, fill it out, and we will be in touch. We'll move forward with the third item.
To you, Mr. Mayor, with respect to the third item, as you know, I do have a recommendation report following the last time we had the item before Special Council Public Planning meeting. So I have a recommendation report to approve the rezoning application and the site plan for the Small Step Daycare. Marty is a planner on a file. We don't have a presentation similar to the first two applications, but I know the applicant's planner, Mr. Bagnall, is here who wants to provide a presentation, and then I'll certainly be open to addressing any questions council may have with respect to the report before them.
Marty, please.
No, Matt.
Oh, I'm sorry. We'll go right to Matt.
Yeah, Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. My name is Matt Bagnall of Larkin Land Use Planners, the agent acting on behalf of the applicant, Small Steps Early Learning Centre, who are here this evening. Just like to say that we have worked closely with staff throughout the application process, including on revisions to the original proposal that was before you at the previous public planning meeting. This has resulted in a redesign of the rear parking area to increase parking spaces to meet with the town's parking policies and respond to staff and public comments. An additional 2 parking spaces have been included within the site, providing 6 in total. We propose on the site plan that this will be 5 remaining exclusively for the use of drop-offs and pickups of children, 1 for a staff member. We have had transportation planning consultants involved on the file since we were previously here and have completed a parking and manoeuvring report and assessment. This concludes that the daycare will have sufficient parking with the 6 spaces to accommodate the demands of the site, and that vehicles can enter, park and exit the site with no issues. That same report refers to potential parking procedures and initiatives, which includes a memo advising parents of the drop-off and pick-up parking to take place on the site only. And this will be managed by a staff member, and my client is committed to this to ensure that there is proper management of drop-offs and pick-ups of children. We fully concur with the contents of the staff report before you this evening, as well as the recommendations set out therein. Should you have any questions, however, I would be pleased to answer those for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bagnall. I'll just open it up first and ask if there's any members of the public who would like to speak to this issue. Seeing none, I will ask if there's any members of council who have questions for the proponent. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Daw. Matt, is it?
Yes.
You indicated that some of the changes were made to the parking so that of the spaces, 1 is dedicated to staff parking, the rest is for pickup and drop-off. But I read in the report that there may be 5 employees. So where are the employees going to park if they only have 1 space?
So there is good access to transit in the area. We're close to the GO transit station as well as York Region Transit. My client has advised that they will be advising any new staff members that they would have to make other arrangements. They wouldn't be permitted to park on site or on the road at the front, and they're committed to ensuring that that takes place in perpetuity while they're at the site.
Because other than the GO parking lot, there's not a lot of public parking in that area. I do know that street fairly well. Even street parking is very difficult. Some of it's taken up by the residents that are there, but also sometimes by those that are taking the GO train as well. So it is quite a challenge, and so there is a bit of a concern on my part of where the employees are going to park if they had to take a car to work.
I think typically, in having spoken to my client who does operate another daycare in Richmond Hill, quite often you'd get carers wouldn't actually have a vehicle, and they do make, I think, less than a third, I understand, actually use a car at their existing site, and they do make other arrangements, and they could see the same thing happening here. But certainly they would be advising that there's just the 1 space on site, and the other 5 spaces are for the pick-up and drop-off of children.
Thank you. And then my other question, and if you can sort of maybe elaborate on how they're going to manage the pickups and drop-off. You stated that they may have up to 35 kids, and when I look at the site and I look at the driveway and the volume of traffic that's on our Center Street to begin with, especially during those time periods, it's hard for me to imagine how they're going to manage that piece because, you know, I'm not sure. So can you elaborate how they're going to be able to do that, especially if, part of the attractiveness of that daycare center is for those people that are taking the GO train, so they can drop their kids off before and then take the GO train. They're going to try and time it all so that they can catch the train, at that same time. So how is it going to work?
There might be, that might be the case, but there is going to be, it will open from 7 in the morning. It's open till 6:30 in the evening, and they do envision that there's going to be a staggered time of drop-offs from anything from that opening time through to typically about 9 o'clock. In the afternoon, it's going to be even more spread out, as certain parents may come after lunch or even later. There have been recommendations made in the MMM parking and manoeuvring report, certain initiatives that they will certainly explore, which includes discussing with parents potential for carpooling, as well as perhaps in the summer months certainly, using staff or perhaps parents to collect local children from the area and walk them to the site. Just things that will reduce, therefore, the amount of vehicle movements to the site. Also, they will obviously speak to parents about when they think they're most likely to be dropping off and picking up. If they feel that there's a time where there might be more of a concentration than others, then that's certainly the time they'll focus on and use staff members to direct people in and out and ensure that there's not a build-up of traffic.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Because what I've seen from other Montessori schools and daycares and so forth in our area is some queuing that usually happens. And given the narrowness of Center Street and the fact that even this morning, when I went by, all of the street from the tracks to industrial had cars parked on it, so it was hard to get by to begin with. So it is a concern about how you're going to do it. I understand that probably technically you can figure out a way to do it, but it's practically that I'm concerned about. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Other speakers for the proponent? Councillor Kim. Did Councillor Peary hit you? Is that why you're nosebleeding?
It wasn't that hard.
Okay, just checking.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to add to Councillor Thompson's point about traffic, yeah, we already know that Center Street is already congested. I think another concern that I just want to bring forth is that we had an application for a large condo in the northeast corner of Industrial and Wellington as well, and we're having the big problem with that is all the left turns, right turns going from center and the sidewalk. So just with that and having a daycare there, it's not the most ideal place. Just wanted to bring that forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other speakers for the proponent? I'll throw in my 2 cents on the traffic management. One of the most, if not the most common complaints that we get sitting on this side of the table is traffic, without a doubt. And Center Street is a challenge. And Councillor Thompson mentioned Montessori schools. There's a Montessori on Industrial Parkway just south of St. John's. I would encourage you to go sit there one morning and watch what happens. It is a challenge. So I think that we're all concerned about parking, driving and parking in that area. I mean, we hear it all the time, whether it's GO parking or commuters parking at the GO parking lot or around Town Park or on side streets. So I think that's probably, I don't think anybody here has an issue with the daycare. I think we have, our concern is the functioning of the daycare. And I know that, I'm sure there'll be questions for Mr. Rumuno with respect to the traffic, but I just want you to be really well aware of what our concerns are with respect to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if there's no other questions for the proponent, I will thank you, sir. Appreciate you coming out. And I will now ask someone to put the recommendation on the floor. And for me, we'll close the public portion. We'll put the recommendation on the floor and have a discussion with respect to it. Councillor Abel, thank you. Second, please. Councillor Kim. Speakers, please, to the proposal. Councillor Abel. Councilor Perry.
You know, the proponents here have heard our concerns, and they've got a business plan, and they've got dreams, and they see themselves being successful. They understand the challenge, and I wish them all the best of luck. In a lot of ways, it makes sense to me for GO commuters having access to a daycare there, and I've seen it in other busy areas, so I wish them luck, and I'm sure they'll figure it all out.
Thank you, Councilor Abel. Councilor Perry, Councilor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to Mr. Ramuno. I don't know if you've had any conversations with Ms. Van Leeuwen on this, but what happens if you know, there are major concerns caused with this facility in terms of stopping traffic, dangers to children's health, you know, if they're having to cross in front of traffic. Just, I don't feel 100% comfortable with the layout and the plan that we have in front of us. It's being recommended to move forward. What happens if it doesn't work? What are the recourses? How can we? I don't want, I guess my concern is I see a very real problem here, and I don't want to approve something without knowing how it could be potentially solved.
Mr. Ramuno.
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Mayor. I have heard the concerns, and I've heard the concerns from a number of councillors, even previous to this tonight's meeting. Staff did work, our transportation staff did work with the applicant's transportation analyst to have them revise their site plan to a point where they were satisfied that there was enough on-site maneuvering to accommodate the parent drop-off and pickup. Obviously, we realize that there's a concern that if that spills over onto Center Street, there would be some queuing on Center Street, and I've witnessed that in just about every childcare facility or private school, you know, in York region. But I did have a discussion with our traffic analyst, and he tells me, you know, they are satisfied with the site plan as is. The applicant did mention that, you know, and we've mentioned in the report that one of the requirements that we're going to require, you know, in our site plan is that the applicants will provide an information package, you know, if the application is approved and development proceeds, to the future parents to ensure that they're aware of what the expectations are with respect to where and how to drop off their kids. That, you know, they are required to drive through in behind, park, drop off the kids, and there will be a staff person there to guide those parents in and out. I have, you know, in my discussion with our traffic analyst, he has mentioned that he was satisfied, even though we understand that there could be some challenges with these type of facilities. There always are. That, you know, along Center Street, that, you know, based on his information, Center Street is traffic volumes on Center Street are below average for that type of road. Having said that, we realize that we do get people and commuters parking throughout the day. Moving forward, I think if council, you know, adopts the recommendation, what I would, you know, commit to including an additional condition within the site plan agreement, and it's really more of a warning clause for the applicants or any future applicants that, you know, we word a condition such as to make it crystal clear that any activities specifically for the parent drop-off and pickup would have to occur on site and not on Center Street. So that would be a condition within the agreement, registered on title. And then if we do get complaints, you know, once the building, the operation is you know, in operation, that would be an enforcement issue at our end, and we would send our staff out to have discussions with the applicant to ensure that, you know, operation of the drop-off and pickup should occur on site, and we would deal with it once the childcare facility is in operation, we'll see how things do function. But at this point, that's why my recommendation is to approve the zoning, and the site plan is based on the information that our traffic people have seen and worked with the applicant's traffic consultant. They're satisfied with the site plan and the number of parking spaces and the maneuverability area within the rear yard to accommodate for those staggered pickup, drop off and pickup, because it's a little different than a school or a private school where, morning classes start at, 8 and finish at 4. Typically with some of these childcare facilities, they are staggered drop off and pick up throughout that morning and afternoon peak period.
Councillor? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Daw. Can I ask if Linda could put the overhead map on the viewer? It's page 11 of our report, or page 35 consecutively.
Linda, please.
It's the street view, the overhead. Personally, I think that having a daycare in close proximity to the GO station, I think it's a good idea. I think there's tremendous value there. But, I personally don't think that this particular